A millionaire saved a homeless girl from the streets and brought her to care for his sick mother. Hours later, when he returned home, he was shocked by what she had done. Where are you watching this from? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more incredible stories that will touch your heart. The evening rain hammered against the tinted windows of Michael Harrington's Mercedes as it glided through downtown. Inside, the scent of leather and sandalwood cologne created a cocoon of luxury that felt increasingly suffocating with each passing. Michael stared blankly at the streams of water racing down the glass, his reflection fragmenting in the droplets. A 40-year-old face with lines etched deeper than his age warranted. "Sir, we've arrived," his driver announced, breaking his trance. Michael stepped out into the downpour, his Italian leather shoes immediately soaking through. He barely noticed. The cold water seeping into his socks matched the numbness he'd been carrying for months. Since his father's passing, the weight of the Harrington empire rested squarely on his shoulders. A billion-dollar technology corporation, philanthropic foundations, and a family legacy built on generations of calculated decisions. The sidewalk outside the upscale restaurant was nearly empty, but a movement caught his eye. A teenage girl huddled beneath the restaurant's narrow awning, drenched and shivering. Her clothes hung on her thin frame like wet paper, her dark hair plastered against her pale face. Something about her vacant expression mirrored his own internal emptiness. Their eyes met briefly before she looked away, shrinking further into herself. "Mr. Harrington, your usual table is ready," the maitre d' called from the doorway, his tone overly deferential. Michael hesitated, raindrops cascading from his expensive coat. The girl looked up again, and this time, behind the fear and exhaustion, he saw a fierce pride that struck him like a physical blow. "Just a moment," he told the maitre d'. Michael approached the girl slowly, careful not to appear threatening. "You look like you could use a hot meal." She tensed immediately. "I don't need your charity," she responded, her voice surprisingly steady despite her trembling body. "It's not charity," Michael replied, surprised by his own words. "It's just dinner." The restaurant's warm glow spilled onto the sidewalk between them, illuminating the vast distance between their worlds, a distance that suddenly seemed both immense and paper-thin. The girl, Emily, she'd reluctantly shared, sat across from Michael in the restaurant's corner booth, her wary eyes scanning the opulent surroundings as if calculating escape routes. The waiter had initially hesitated when Michael requested a table for two, his gaze lingering disapprovingly on Emily's soaked clothes and tangled hair. A single stern look from Michael had settled the matter. "You can order whatever you want," Michael said, pushing the menu toward her. Emily touched the leather-bound menu with tentative fingers. "Why are you doing this?" The question hung between them, simple, yet impossible to answer. Michael couldn't explain the strange compulsion that had made him stop for this stranger, when he routinely ignored the dozens of charity requests that crossed his desk weekly. "Does it matter?" he replied. "It always matters why people do things." Her blue eyes, startlingly bright against her pallor, held his gaze with unexpected intensity. Especially when rich men suddenly decide to help teenage girls. Michael flinched at the implication. "I know," she interrupted, a ghost of a smile on her lips. "If you were that kind of creep, you wouldn't have brought me to a five-star restaurant with witnesses everywhere." She gestured around the room. "So why am I here, Mr. Harrington?" He blinked, surprised she knew his name. She must have overheard the maitre d'. "Maybe I just wanted company for dinner." "Bull," she said flatly. "You're Michael Harrington. You could have any company you wanted. Try again." Her directness caught him off guard, piercing through the polite facade he'd maintained for so long. "You reminded me of something." "What?" "Myself, maybe. Before everything." The waiter returned, and Emily ordered with surprising confidence, the most expensive steak on the menu. Michael couldn't help but smile. She had spirit. As they ate, Emily gradually revealed fragments of her story. She was 17, had been in the foster system for years, and had recently run away from her latest placement, a home where the parents collected foster children for government checks while providing minimal care. "Where will you go after this?" Michael asked as she finished her dessert. Emily shrugged, the momentary comfort of the meal already giving way to the reality of her situation. "Around. I'll figure it out." Michael hesitated, a strange impulse taking hold. "I have a large house. There's a guest suite you could use." "Right," she scoffed. "And why would you do that?" "Because my mother is dying," he said, the words escaping before he could stop them. "She has Alzheimer's. There are nurses, but the house is empty otherwise. Just me rattling around in too many rooms." Emily studied him, wariness battling with desperate need. "I don't do anything weird, and I don't clean toilets." "I have staff for that," Michael replied, surprised to find himself almost smiling again. "It would just be a room. Until you figure out your next step." "One night," Emily agreed cautiously. "Then I decide if I stay longer." As they left the restaurant, Michael realized that for the first time in months, the crushing weight on his chest had lightened, if only slightly. Something about Emily's blunt honesty cut through the suffocating politeness that had surrounded him since his father's death. Since long before, really. He didn't understand why, but helping this girl felt like throwing open a window in a room that had been sealed shut for years. The Harrington estate sprawled across 5 acres of manicured grounds, its modernist glass and stone architecture looming against the night sky. Emily's eyes widened as they passed through the security gates, the car's headlights sweeping across perfectly trimmed hedges and artistic sculptures. "You live here? Just you and your mum?" Disbelief colored her voice. "And the staff," Michael replied, suddenly seeing his home through her eyes. Excessive, cold, a monument to wealth rather than a place of warmth. As they entered the vast foyer, an older woman in a nurse's uniform approached, her expression transitioning from professional deference to obvious surprise at the sight of Emily. "Mr. Harrington, we weren't expecting you to bring a guest," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "Sarah, this is Emily. She'll be staying in the East Wing guest suite." Michael's voice adopted the authoritative tone he used in boardrooms, brooking no argument. Sarah's lips pressed into a thin line. "As you wish. Shall I prepare the room?" "Please, and have the kitchen send up some hot chocolate." As Sarah departed, her disapproval hanging in the air like perfume, Emily shifted uncomfortably. "Your staff doesn't seem thrilled about me." "They're paid to manage the house, not my personal decisions," Michael replied stiffly. Emily rolled her eyes. "That's a fancy way of saying you don't actually care what they think." Her directness, so alien in his world of careful diplomacy, struck him again. When was the last time anyone had spoken to him without calculation, without wanting something? "Would you like to meet my mother?" he found himself asking. Emily's expression softened slightly. "Will it upset her, having a stranger around?" "Some days she doesn't recognize even me," Michael admitted, the familiar pain resurfacing. "But she's having a good week according to her doctors. She might enjoy a new face." They walked through the silent hallways to the West Wing, where Eleanor Harrington's suite was located. Michael knocked gently before entering. His mother sat in an armchair by the window, a silver-haired woman with aristocratic features and hands that had once commanded boardrooms themselves. She looked up, momentary confusion crossing her face before recognition dawned. "Michael," she said warmly. Then her gaze shifted to Emily. "And who's this young lady?" "This is Emily, Mother. She'll be staying with us for a while." Eleanor's eyes, still sharp despite her illness, took in Emily's worn clothes and defensive posture. To Michael's surprise, his mother smiled. "How lovely. We could use some youth in this mausoleum." Emily stepped forward, her earlier brashness replaced by unexpected gentleness. "It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Harrington." "Eleanor, please." "Mrs. Harrington makes me feel ancient." She gestured to a nearby chair. "Sit, tell me about yourself." As Emily hesitantly began to chat with his mother, Michael watched in astonishment. Eleanor had been increasingly withdrawn, even on her good days, yet here she was, animated and engaged. Emily, meanwhile, shed her streetwise edge, revealing a perceptive kindness as she carefully navigated conversation with an Alzheimer's patient. When they eventually left Eleanor's room, Michael felt a strange sensation in his chest, like the first crack in a frozen lake. "Your mum is cool," Emily said as they walked toward her suite. "Why do you look so surprised?" "She doesn't usually connect like that anymore," Michael admitted. "It's been months since I've seen her so present." Emily shrugged. Maybe she just needed someone who doesn't look at her like she's already gone. The observation hit with such precision that Michael stopped walking. "What do you mean?" "You get this look when you talk to her, like you're already mourning. People can feel that, you know, even people with Alzheimer's." Michael felt his defenses rising. "You don't know anything about my relationship with my mother." "True," Emily conceded, unintimidated by his sudden coldness. "But I know what it's like when people look at you like you're a problem instead of a person. It makes you want to disappear." They reached her suite, and Emily paused at the doorway. "Thanks for the room, Mr. Harrington, but don't think letting a stray crash in your mansion makes you some kind of saint." The door closed firmly between them, leaving Michael alone. In the hallway, her words echoing uncomfortable truths through the empty corridors of his perfect hollow life. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Michael's home office, catching dust motes that danced in the air. He had been awake since dawn, unable to sleep, his mind cycling through yesterday's encounter with Emily. Her words had burrowed under his skin, raising questions he'd been avoiding for months, years perhaps. His phone buzzed with the day's first crisis. The European division was reporting manufacturing delays that would impact quarterly projections. The board would want answers, solutions, immediate action. For the first time, Michael hesitated before responding. What did any of it matter? The endless cycle of profits and losses, mergers and acquisitions, a wheel turning without purpose or meaning. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Sarah stood at the doorway, her posture rigid. "Your guest is in the kitchen, Mr. Harrington," she said, emphasizing guest in a way that conveyed her continued disapproval. "She's going through the refrigerator." Michael suppressed a smile at the housekeeper's obvious discomfort. "Thank you, Sarah. I'll handle it." He found Emily perched on a kitchen counter, spoon in hand, eating ice cream directly from the container. "That's breakfast?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. She shrugged, unembarrassed. "It's dairy, calcium and all that." Michael found himself chuckling as he moved to the coffee machine. "There's actual food, you know. Mrs. Chen could make you anything you want." "I don't like people doing things for me," Emily said, her spoon pausing mid-air. "It creates obligations." The simple statement revealed volumes about her life experience. Michael poured his coffee, considering her words. "Not everyone has ulterior motives, Emily." "Everyone wants something," she countered, closing the ice cream container. "Even you." "What do I want?" "I haven't figured that out yet, but you're not letting me stay here out of pure kindness. Maybe I'm some kind of charity project. Maybe you're lonely, maybe you're trying to impress someone." She hopped down from the counter. "Or maybe you're running from something, and I'm a convenient distraction." Her insight was unnervingly accurate. Michael felt suddenly exposed, as if the girl could see straight through the carefully constructed facade he'd maintained for decades. "I have meetings today," he said, retreating to safer ground. "But I thought perhaps you'd like to visit some shops, get some new clothes." Emily's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "I don't need a makeover." "It's not a makeover. It's just clothes that fit." He gestured vaguely at her oversized t-shirt and worn jeans. "Unless you brought luggage, I didn't. See?" For a moment, her tough exterior cracked, revealing the vulnerability beneath. "Fine, but nothing fancy, and I'm picking everything out myself." "Of course, I'll have Thomas drive you." "No," she interrupted firmly. "You come with me." Michael blinked in surprise. "I have meetings." "Reschedule them," Emily challenged. "If I'm worth helping, I'm worth your time, right?" It was a test, Michael realized, not of his generosity but of his sincerity. Was this girl just another item on his philanthropic checklist, or was he truly invested in her well-being? To his own surprise, Michael pulled out his phone. "Let me make some calls." 4 hours later, they stood in a department store fitting room area, shopping bags already accumulating at their feet. Emily emerged wearing jeans that actually fit, paired with a simple blue sweater that brought out her eyes. "Better," Michael acknowledged. It's weird, Emily said, examining her reflection. I look like someone else. Who? Someone with a future, maybe. She turned away from the mirror quickly, as if the image was too painful to contemplate. Michael recognized the behavior, the careful avoidance of hope. He'd seen it in business competitors who knew they were beaten, in employees facing layoffs, but seeing it in a 17-year-old girl felt profoundly wrong. You do have a future, Emily, she forced a laugh. Sure, but first, lunch. You're buying, billionaire boy. As they ate in a casual cafe, Emily had rejected his suggestion of an upscale restaurant. Michael observed how she carefully wrapped half her sandwich to take with her, a habit born from not knowing when the next meal would come. His phone had buzzed continuously throughout lunch, each message marked urgent, each crisis demanding his immediate attention. For the first time in his career, Michael let them wait. Your phone's having a seizure, Emily commented, nodding toward the vibrating device. It can wait. No one's irreplaceable, you know, she said, surprising him again with her perception. Not even billionaires. The world keeps spinning if you take a day off. The simple truth of her statement hit him with unexpected force. When was the last time he'd taken a day for himself? Not a strategic vacation to impress clients, or a calculated appearance at a charity function, but simply a day to exist as Michael, not as Harrington Enterprises. What would you do, he asked suddenly, if you could do anything today, no limitations? Emily studied him skeptically. Why? Humor me. She considered the question seriously, her young face thoughtful. I'd go to the art museum, she finally said. I've never been to one. Of all the possibilities, amusement parks, shopping sprees, movies, her answer surprised him. The art museum? Emily shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. I like to draw. Never had lessons or anything, but I've seen pictures of famous paintings. I'd like to see the real thing someday. Within an hour, they were standing in the city's renowned art museum, Emily's face transformed by wonder as she gazed at masterpieces she'd only seen in books. Michael watched her studying each brushstroke, each composition, with a reverence he'd forgotten could exist. They're alive, she whispered, standing before a Van Gogh. In pictures, they're just pictures. But here, you can see they were made by actual human hands. As she moved through the galleries, Michael found himself seeing the art through her fresh perspective, noticing details he'd overlooked during mandatory cultural events, the museum's familiar halls, which he'd traversed dozens of times at fundraisers, and galas suddenly revealed treasures he'd never truly seen. For one afternoon, Michael Harrington wasn't a CEO or a philanthropist or the heir to a troubled legacy. He was simply a man watching a young woman discover beauty in a world that had shown her little kindness. It felt strangely like waking up. Over the following week, a tentative rhythm developed in the Harrington mansion. Emily remained cautious but gradually settled into the guest suite, her few new possessions, books, art supplies, clothes, marking the space as temporarily hers. Each evening she would sit with Eleanor, looking through old photo albums and listening to stories that Michael's mother sometimes repeated, but Emily never seemed to mind hearing again. These visits became the highlight of Eleanor's days. On ties. 2 occasions, Michael found himself pausing outside his mother's suite, listening to the sound of genuine laughter, a sound he hadn't heard in these halls for years. She's good with her, Sarah admitted grudgingly one afternoon, as Michael watched Emily patiently helping Eleanor identify family members in an old photograph. Your mother remembered your father's name today, first time in months. The observation lingered with Michael as he returned to his office, where quarterly reports awaited his review. The company was performing adequately, not exceptionally, just meeting market expectations. Like his life, Michael realized, it was progressing along a predetermined path without inspiration or passion. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Emily stood at the doorway, sketchbook in hand. Your mom's resting, she explained. Is it okay if I hang out here? The view is better than from my room. Michael gestured to the leather sofa beneath the window. Make yourself comfortable. She settled in silently, opening her sketchbook. For nearly an hour, they coexisted in comfortable silence, Michael reviewing reports, Emily drawing with focused intensity. "Can I ask you something?" she finally said without looking up from her work. "Of course." "Are you actually happy with all this?" She gestured vaguely at the office, the mansion beyond, the empire it represented. The question was so direct, so stripped of pretense, that Michael found himself answering honestly before his usual filters could engage. "I don't know if happiness is the point." "What is the point then?" "Legacy, responsibility, continuing what my father built." Emily looked up, her expression genuinely curious rather than judgmental. "But what if you built something different? Something that was yours?" "The company is mine." "Is it? Because it sounds like it's still your dad's company. You're just keeping his chair warm." Michael felt a flash of defensiveness. "You don't understand how these things work." "Probably not," she conceded easily. "But I understand what it looks like when someone's living someone else's life." "And how would you know that?" Emily's pencil stilled. "Foster care. You learn to be whoever they want. Quiet kid, helpful kid, invisible kid. Whatever keeps you safe in each house, after a while you forget who you actually are." The parallel struck Michael with uncomfortable clarity. Wasn't that exactly what he'd been doing? Being the son his father wanted, the CEO the board expected, the philanthropist society demanded. "What were you before all that?" he asked quietly. A sad smile touched her lips. "I don't remember anymore." She turned her sketchbook around, revealing a portrait of Michael himself, captured with surprising skill. Not the polished executive, but the man beneath, his eyes reflecting a weariness and longing he hadn't realized were visible to others. "That's how you look when you think no one's watching," Emily said simply. Michael stared at the drawing, unsettled by its accuracy. "You're very talented." "Just observant," she replied, closing the sketchbook. "When you move around a lot, you learn to read people quickly. It's a survival skill." As she left the office, Michael remained haunted by the portrait, not by the skill of its execution, but by the truth it revealed. Was that really how he appeared to the world? A man hollowed out by expectations, going through motions that no longer held meaning. Later that evening, Michael found himself outside the door to his father's study, a room he'd preserved exactly as Richard Harrington had left it. He rarely entered it, but tonight, drawn by emotions he couldn't name, he turned the handle. The heavy scent of leather and his father's preferred cigar tobacco still lingered faintly. Awards and photographs covered the walls, Richard shaking. Hands with presidents and prime ministers, receiving accolades, always perfectly composed, perfectly in control, the Harrington legacy, captured in gilded frames. Michael's gaze fell on his father's desk calendar, still open to the date of his final stroke. The day's schedule had been packed with meetings, calls, decisions, life at full throttle until the very end. "Did you ever slow down?" Michael whispered to the empty room. "Did you ever wonder if there might be more than this?" Only silence answered him. The sound of raised voices drew Michael from his morning coffee. Following the commotion to the main hallway, he found Sarah and Emily in what appeared to be a heated confrontation. "Completely inappropriate," Sarah was saying, her normally composed face flushed with anger. "Mrs. Harrington needs consistency and calm, not disruption from someone who doesn't understand her condition." Emily stood her ground, chin raised defiantly. She was laughing, she was happy. "What's your problem?" "My problem," Sarah said through clenched teeth, "is that you're encouraging activities that could agitate her. Finger painting? At her age? And condition. It's undignified and potentially harmful." Michael cleared his throat and both turned toward him. "What's going on?" Sarah straightened her uniform. "Mr. Harrington, I was just explaining to Emily that your mother's care routine cannot be altered without medical consultation. She took it upon herself to engage Mrs. Harrington in messy art activities that could increase her agitation." "We're painting," Emily clarified, rolling her eyes. "And she loved it. The doctor even said stimulating activities help slow cognitive decline, but everyone around here treats her like she's made of glass." Michael hesitated, caught between established protocol and the undeniable improvement in his mother's spirits since Emily's arrival. "Show me," he finally said. Eleanor's sitting room had been transformed. Sheets covered the expensive furniture, and watercolor paintings hung drying on makeshift clothespins strung across the windows. In the center, Eleanor herself sat at a small table, carefully adding blue strokes to a painting of what appeared to be the garden. "Michael," she exclaimed, looking up with more animation than he'd seen in months. "Come see what we're creating. Emily's teaching me watercolors." Michael approached, taking in his mother's paint-stained fingers and bright eyes. The artwork itself was simple, but showed a deliberateness that surprised him. Not the work of someone losing their cognitive abilities, but of someone reconnecting with them. "'Tis beautiful, Mother," he said sincerely. "Emily says art is memory made visible," Eleanor explained, adding another careful stroke. "I'm painting the garden as I remember it when you were small. Remember how you used to climb that oak tree? Your father was always afraid you'd fall." Michael felt his throat tighten. His mother rarely recalled such specific memories anymore. "I remember." Sarah watched from the doorway, her disapproval evident but tempered by the obvious positive effect on her patient. "Perhaps," Michael said carefully, "we could incorporate some art therapy into my mother's regular schedule. With proper supervision, of course." Sarah's lips pursed, but she nodded stiffly. "I'll consult with Dr. Matthews." After she departed, Emily shot Michael a triumphant look. "She doesn't like being wrong." "Neither do I," Michael admitted, surprising himself with his candor. "The Harrington way. Never admit error, never show weakness." "Sounds exhausting," Emily commented, helping Eleanor clean her brushes. "It is." The simple acknowledgement felt like removing a stone from his shoe, a small relief from a persistent discomfort he'd grown so accustomed to, he barely noticed it anymore. Later that day, an urgent call from the board of directors pulled Michael back into the corporate world. Harrington Enterprises was facing a potential crisis. A competitor had developed technology that threatened to make their flagship product obsolete. "We need immediate action, Michael," the CFO insisted during the emergency meeting. "Aggressive market positioning, possibly legal challenges to their patents." "What about our own innovation?" Michael asked. "Could we adapt rather than attack?" The board members exchanged glances. "That's not the Harrington way," one finally said. "Your father would have crushed this competition before it gained traction." The familiar refrain, "your father would have," echoed in Michael's mind, suddenly grating rather than guiding. Perhaps, he heard himself saying, "it's time for a new Harrington way." The statement hung in the boardroom like a heretical pronouncement. For the first time in his tenure as CEO, Michael found himself questioning the aggressive, domineering business philosophy his father had instilled. Was there another path? One that created rather than crushed, that built without destroying? The meeting ended with tension and unresolved questions. When Michael returned home, mentally exhausted, he found Emily and Eleanor in the garden, collecting flowers for pressing. "Rough day at the office, dear?" Eleanor asked, momentarily so lucid and maternal that Michael felt like a child again. "So you could say that," he replied, loosening his tie. "The board thinks I'm losing my edge." "About time," Eleanor murmured, then looked surprised at her own words. "I didn't mean—" "It's okay, Mother," Michael assured her, helping her gather the last of the flowers. "I think you might be right." As they worked together in the fading afternoon light, Michael felt something shift within him, a willingness to consider that the foundations he'd built his life upon might not be as solid as he'd always believed. The annual Harrington Foundation Gala loomed on Michael's calendar, a high-profile charity event where the city's elite gathered to write checks and be seen supporting worthy causes. In previous years, Michael had approached it as a business obligation, another arena to maintain the family's social standing and influence. This year he found himself dreading it with unusual intensity. "You look like you're preparing for a funeral, not a party," Emily observed, leaning against his office doorway as he reviewed the guest list. Michael glanced up. 2 weeks in the Harrington household had softened her rough edges. She stood straighter. Her clothes, still simple but now well-fitting, gave her a confidence she'd lacked before. Yet her directness remained refreshingly intact. "These events aren't exactly celebrations," he replied. "They're strategic social engagements." Emily made a gagging sound. "That sounds horrible. Why do it then?" The question, so simple yet so challenging, made Michael pause. "It's expected. The foundation needs to maintain relationships with donors. So send someone else. You're the boss, right?" "My presence specifically is required." Even to his own ears, the explanation sounded weak. Emily studied him for a long moment. "You know what I think? I think you're afraid." "Afraid?" Michael scoffed. "I've been handling events like this since I was in college. Not afraid of the event," she clarified. "Afraid of disappointing people. Afraid of not being the perfect Harrington heir for 1 minute of one day." The accuracy of her assessment stung. Before he could formulate a response, Emily continued. "Take your mum. She'd probably love an evening out, and it's for charity, right? I could help her get ready." Michael's immediate instinct was to refuse. Eleanor's condition made public appearances complicated and potentially distressing, yet the idea held a certain appeal. His mother had been more lucid lately, more engaged. "Perhaps I'll consider it," he said finally. The night of the gala arrived with unexpected complications. Eleanor was indeed having one of her good days and seemed genuinely excited about attending. Sarah had helped her dress in an elegant gown, while Emily had carefully styled her silver hair. "You look beautiful, Mother," Michael said sincerely when he saw her. Eleanor smiled, a flash of her former confidence visible. "I may be fading, dear, but I still know how to make an entrance." As they prepared to leave, however, an urgent call came through from Japan. A key manufacturing partner was threatening to pull out of a major contract, citing concerns about Harrington's stagnating innovation. "The idea has merit, but we're concerned about the practical implementation. A program specifically for foster children presents certain challenges." The conversation quickly devolved into discussions of liability issues, screening processes, and metrics for measuring success, the foundation's good intentions becoming entangled in bureaucratic caution. Michael watched Emily's expression close off as she was effectively excluded from a conversation about a program supposedly designed to help young people like her. "Perhaps," one board member suggested, "we should consider a broader approach? Disadvantaged youth in general, rather than specifically foster children. The optics would be better." "Optics?" Emily repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. "Is that all kids like me are to you? A photo op for your annual report?" An uncomfortable silence fell over the group. Bradford Wells cleared his throat. "Young. Lady, these matters are complex." "No, they're not," Emily interrupted. "Either you want to help people or you don't. All this talk about optics and metrics, it's just fancy ways of saying you want the credit without doing the actual work." "Emily," Michael cautioned, though part of him thrilled at her honesty. "You know what? Forget it," she said, setting down her glass with deliberate care. "I don't want to be anyone's good deed anyway." As she walked away, the board members exchanged uncomfortable glances. "Quite spirited," one commented dryly. "Perhaps this illustrates my point about proper screening." Michael looked from the retreating figure of Emily to the board members with their concerned expressions, to his mother now sitting alone at their table, the excitement of earlier fading from her face. In that moment, something broke inside him, the careful walls he'd constructed to separate his personal feelings from business decisions, his true self from the persona expected of a Harrington. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice steady, "I think we're missing the point entirely. Please, excuse me." He found Emily outside on the venue's terrace, arms wrapped around herself in the cool evening air. "I shouldn't have said all that," she muttered without turning around. "I embarrassed you." "Actually," Michael said, joining her at the railing, "I think you were the only honest person in that room." Emily glanced at him suspiciously. "You're not mad?" "I'm mad at myself," he admitted, "for becoming exactly the kind of person you just called out." The admission hung between them, more truthful than anything Michael had said in years. In the distance, the city lights sparkled like promises, possibilities he'd never allowed himself. To consider. "I need to get my mother home," he said finally. "Would you help me?" As they re-entered the ballroom, Michael felt something fundamental shifting within him. The first tremors of a decision that would change everything. The morning after the gala, Michael sat in his father's study, surrounded by the trappings of the Harrington legacy. News of Emily's confrontation with the board members had already circulated through his social circle, with several concerned calls suggesting he handle the situation before it affected the foundation's reputation. For the first time, such concerns felt utterly trivial. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Eleanor entered, moving slowly but with purpose, looking more like her former self than she had in months. "You're troubled," she stated, settling into the leather chair across from him. Michael smiled faintly. "That obvious?" "To a mother, always." She glanced around the study. "You know, you've preserved this room exactly as he left it, like a museum exhibit." The observation struck uncomfortably close to Emily's earlier comments about living someone else's life. "I wanted to honor his legacy," Michael explained. Eleanor's laugh held a surprising bitterness. Legacy, Richard's favorite word. "Do you know what I see when I look at this room? A prison." She gestured to the photographs lining the walls. "All these accomplishments, these accolades, they came at a cost, Michael. A cost I'm not sure was worth paying." Michael leaned forward, startled by this unexpected perspective. "What do you mean?" "Your father was brilliant, driven, successful by every conventional measure. But he missed your childhood pursuing legacy. He missed our marriage pursuing legacy. He collected achievements like trophies while forgetting to actually live." Her eyes, suddenly clear and penetrating, held his. "And now you're doing the same." The words hit like a physical blow. "I'm carrying on what he built." "No," Eleanor interrupted gently. "You're sacrificing your life to maintain a monument to his." She reached across the desk to take his hand. "That girl, Emily, she reminds me of you before..." "Before what?" "Before you became what Richard wanted instead of who you were meant to be." "I need to handle this," Michael told his mother apologetically. "But the car is ready for you. Sarah will accompany you, and I'll join as soon as possible." Disappointment flickered across Eleanor's face before she composed herself. "Of course, dear. Business first." As Michael retreated to his office to handle the crisis, he heard Emily's voice from the hallway. "I'll come with you, Eleanor. We'll show those fancy people how it's done." The call dragged on for hours, negotiations delicate and ultimately unresolved. By the time Michael arrived at the gala, the event was in full swing. He spotted his mother immediately, seated at the foundation's table, surrounded by longtime family associates, with Emily attentively at her side. As he approached, Michael overheard snippets of conversation. "Always believed in supporting young artists," Eleanor was saying clearly. "Richard was more focused on technology, but I've always felt the arts nurture the soul in ways technology cannot." "Speaking of young artists," said Bradford Wells, one of the foundation's largest donors, "this young lady was just showing me some remarkable sketches. You have quite an eye for talent, Eleanor." Michael reached the table as Emily, looking uncomfortable but determined, showed a small sketchbook to the assembled group. He recognized the drawings, quick, skillful captures of the gala's attendees, revealing character through subtle details most would miss. "Michael," his mother exclaimed, "you finally joined us. Emily has been keeping me excellent company." Bradford Wells rose to shake Michael's hand. "Your mother's been telling us about the art therapy program she wants to establish through the foundation, focusing on foster children, I understand." "Brilliant idea. Count me in for initial funding." Michael blinked in confusion. "Art therapy program?" "For kids like me," Emily explained, a challenge in her eyes. "Your mum thought it up. Pretty. Cool, right?" Scanning the table, Michael saw his mother's eyes sparkling with purpose and clarity he hadn't witnessed in years. She had taken Emily's situation and her own condition and transformed them into something meaningful, while he had been stuck on a call about market share and profit margins. "It's an excellent initiative," he agreed, taking his seat. "I'd like to hear more details." As the evening progressed, Michael found himself increasingly sidelined in conversations, as Eleanor, having found a cause that energized her, engaged donors with passionate advocacy for arts education. Emily, meanwhile, navigated the sophisticated crowd with surprising adaptability, her authentic perspective cutting through the usual superficial gala chatter. "Your mother seems remarkably improved," observed Dr. Winters, a neurologist on the Foundation's medical advisory board. "The clarity of purpose is doing wonders for her cognitive function, temporary though it may be." "Yes," Michael agreed, watching Eleanor gesturing animatedly as she described her vision to a group of potential donors. "She's always been passionate about the arts. And your ward. That's an interesting development." "Emily's not my ward," Michael corrected quickly. "She's just staying with us temporarily." Dr. Winters raised an eyebrow. "The rumor mill suggests otherwise. Word is you've taken in a charity case. Very commendable. Excellent optics for the Foundation." The characterization of Emily as a charity case for optics hit Michael like a physical blow. Is that how people saw her? Is that how they saw his motives? Worse, was there truth to it? Had he initially helped Emily to feel better about himself, to check some unconscious box of social responsibility? As the doctor moved away, Michael found himself at the bar, ordering a scotch, his father's preferred drink, though he'd never particularly enjoyed it himself. "Rough night, billionaire boy?" Emily appeared beside him, snagging a virgin cocktail from a passing server. "Your mum's killing it out there. Never seen old rich people whip out checkbooks so fast." Despite his inner turmoil, Michael found himself smiling. "She's always been persuasive when she believes in something." "Yeah, well, she believes in this, and me, weirdly." Emily fidgeted with her drink stirrer. "No one's ever believed in me before." The simple statement, delivered without self-pity, crystallized something for Michael. While he'd been maintaining his father's legacy, his mother, even through the fog of her illness, had recognized something valuable in Emily that he'd only glimpsed. She wasn't seeing a charity case or a social project, but a young woman with genuine gifts to offer the world. "I believe in you too," he said quietly. Emily studied him, her expression unusually vulnerable. "Do you? Or do you just feel sorry for me?" Before he could answer, Bradford Wells approached with several board members. "Michael, we need to discuss your mother's proposal." Michael sat back, stunned by his mother's clarity and insight. "I don't even know who that is anymore." "I do," Eleanor said with surprising firmness. "I see glimpses when you're with Emily, when you forget to be the CEO and just be human." She stood with some effort. "It's not too late, Michael, not for you." After she left, Michael remained motionless, her words reverberating through him. Was she right? Had he been living his entire adult life as a caretaker for someone else's vision rather than creating his own? Later that day, Michael found Emily in the garden, sketching the old oak tree his mother had mentioned, the one he used to climb as a child. "We need to talk," he said, settling on the bench beside her. Emily tensed immediately. "Is this the part where you tell me it's time for me to move on?" "No," Michael replied. "This is the part where I thank you." She looked up, obviously surprised. "For what? Embarrassing you at your fancy gala?" "For showing me what I couldn't see myself." He gestured toward the house. "All of this, the company, the foundation, the wealth, I inherited it, but I've never questioned it, never asked if it's what I truly want. And now I'm questioning everything." The admission felt both terrifying and liberating. "The board is meeting tomorrow to discuss the quarterly strategy. I'm considering proposing some significant changes." Emily studied him skeptically. "What kind of changes?" "A shift in priorities. Less focus on market domination, more on innovation that actually improves lives. Redirecting foundation resources toward programs with real impact, rather than just good optics." "They'll fight you," Emily predicted. "Probably," Michael agreed. "Many of them were my father's appointees. They expect me to maintain his approach." "And if they say no?" Michael took a deep breath, voicing the thought that had been forming since the gala. "Then perhaps it's time to build something new, something that reflects my values, not just his legacy." Emily closed her sketchbook. "That sounds suspiciously like having a backbone, Harrington. Careful, it might become a habit." Despite his anxiety about the coming confrontation, Michael laughed. "Would that be so terrible?" No, Emily said seriously. It might actually make you happy, imagine that. As they sat in companionable silence, Michael realized that this teenager, with her blunt honesty and clear-eyed perspective, had accomplished something no one else had managed in years. She had made him see himself clearly, and the company he had become wasn't someone he particularly liked. Tomorrow would bring difficult conversations and potentially life-altering decisions. But for now, sitting in the garden watching clouds drift across the afternoon sky, Michael felt a curious lightness, as if putting down a burden he hadn't realized he was carrying. The boardroom fell silent as Michael concluded his presentation. The expressions ranged from shock to outrage to calculated neutrality. "Let me be sure I understand," said Victor Harlow, the longest-serving board member and his father's closest ally. "You want to redirect 30% of our R&D budget towards sustainable technology initiatives that may not see profit for years, if ever. You want to restructure the foundation to focus on arts education for foster youth, and you want to abandon the acquisition of Meridian Tech, a move your father spent years positioning for." "That's correct," Michael confirmed, maintaining a calmness he didn't entirely feel. "Have you lost your mind?" The question came from James Whitfield, the CFO. "The shareholders will revolt. The market will punish us severely." "Perhaps, initially," Michael acknowledged. "But I believe in the long term these changes will position us more advantageously in a changing world." "Your father," Victor began. "Is dead," Michael interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind. "And with all due respect to his vision, the world has changed. We need to change with it." The discussion devolved into heated debate, with most board members aligning against Michael's proposals. 2 hours later, it became clear that compromise would not be possible. "I'm afraid I cannot support this radical departure from established strategy," Victor finally stated, speaking for the majority. "If you insist on pursuing these initiatives, you leave us no choice but to call for a confidence vote." Michael nodded, having anticipated this outcome. "I understand. Before you do, I should inform you that I've already spoken with several major shareholders who support my vision for the company's future." It was a calculated bluff. He had reached out, but the conversations were preliminary at best. Uncertainty flickered across several faces. "We'll need time to consider our position," Victor said stiffly. "Let's reconvene next week." As the board members filed out, only Lisa Chen, the newest and youngest member, lingered behind. "For what it's worth," she said quietly, "I think you're right. We've been too focused on competition instead of creation, too concerned with beating others instead of building something worthwhile." Michael smiled gratefully. "Thank you, Lisa. I may need allies in the coming weeks." "You have at least one," she assured him before departing. Michael remained alone in the boardroom, gazing out at the city skyline. He had crossed a threshold, challenged the very foundation of his inheritance, and there was no going back. The sensation was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. When he arrived home that evening, he found Eleanor and Emily in the kitchen attempting to bake cookies, a domestic scene so incongruous with the Harrington household that he stopped in the doorway, momentarily disoriented. "Don't just stand there," Emily called, flour dusting her cheek. "We need a taste tester." As he joined them, sampling misshapen but delicious chocolate chip cookies, Michael found himself describing the board meeting and its potential consequences. "They might force me out," he concluded. "The company has been in Harrington hands. For 3 generations, I could be the one who loses it." Eleanor patted his hand, leaving a smudge of flour. "Then lose it." "There are worse things than losing a company, Michael, like losing yourself. But the legacy is a chain if it binds you to unhappiness," she finished firmly. "Richard built that company because it was his passion, his purpose. What's yours?" The question lingered with Michael as he retreated to his father's study, a room he now saw differently through his mother's eyes. A monument to achievement, yes, but also to a certain kind of isolation. His father had been admired, respected, feared, but rarely loved. On impulse, Michael began removing items from the desk. His father's monogrammed letter opener, the heavy crystal paperweights, the fountain pen set never used but prominently displayed. He placed them carefully in a box, then moved to the photographs, on the walls. Emily appeared in the doorway as he was taking down a particularly imposing portrait of his father, accepting an industry award. "Spring cleaning?" she asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Something like that," Michael replied, setting the heavy frame aside. "I realize this room has never been mine. It's been a shrine." Emily crossed to help him, carefully removing a row of certificates. "What will you put up instead?" The question gave Michael pause. "I don't know yet, something that reflects whatever comes next." "Sounds scary," Emily observed. "Terrifying," Michael agreed with a rueful smile. "I've always known exactly what was expected of me. Now I'm stepping off a cliff without knowing what's below." "But it's your cliff," Emily pointed out. "Your choice." As they worked together, clearing decades of carefully curated history from the walls, Michael felt a growing lightness, as if each removed artifact released some intangible weight from his shoulders. By midnight, the room was transformed. Walls, bare desk clean of his father's possessions, space opened for whatever might come next. Michael stood in the center, surveying the emptiness with a strange mixture of grief and possibility. "Thank you," he said to Emily, who had stayed throughout the process, "for helping with this, for everything, really." She ducked her head, uncomfortable with the gratitude. "I didn't do anything. You showed me what I couldn't see myself." Michael contradicted gently. "That counts for a lot." Emily's expression turned serious. "What happens now, with the company and everything?" "I don't know," Michael admitted. "Fight for my vision, probably, and if that doesn't work, start something new. And me?" The question was quiet, vulnerable in a way Emily rarely allowed herself to be. "Where do I fit in all this?" Michael realized with sudden clarity that in all his considerations about the future, he had automatically included Emily in his mental calculations. In just a few weeks, she had become as much a part of his life as the company itself, perhaps more so. "Wherever you want to fit," he said honestly. "You have a home here for as long as you need it. And if you'll let me, I'd like to help you build a future. Art school, college, whatever path you choose." Emily's eyes widened with surprise and something that looked suspiciously like hope. "You'd do that? Even if you lose everything?" I won't lose everything," Michael said with certainty. "Not what matters most." The week that followed brought chaos and clarity in equal measure. News of the board's division leaked to the business press, leading to speculation about Harrington Enterprises' future and a temporary drop in share prices. Michael's phone rang constantly with calls from concerned investors, puzzled business partners, and reporters seeking comment. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I'm proud of you, Michael. Even if I lose the company, especially then," she said firmly, "because it will mean you chose integrity over inheritance, truth over tradition." She patted his hand. "Your father built something impressive, but it was always his dream, not yours. It's time for you to build your own." As Eleanor retired for the night, Michael remained in the quiet room, his mother's words settling into his consciousness like seeds finding fertile soil. For the first time, he truly understood. Winning tomorrow's battle was far less important than having finally entered the right war. The board vote was a narrow defeat, 7-6 against Michael's proposed changes, with Victor Harlow leading the opposition. The outcome was disappointing but not surprising. "The board has expressed its will," Victor announced with poorly concealed satisfaction. "We expect you to abandon these disruptive initiatives and return to established strategy immediately." Michael nodded calmly, surprising everyone with his equanimity in defeat. "I understand the board's position, and now you should understand mine." He placed a sealed envelope on the table. "My resignation, effective immediately." A shocked silence fell over the boardroom. "This is absurd," Victor sputtered. "You're walking away from your family's company over a policy disagreement." "I'm walking towards something more important," Michael corrected. "My own integrity." Lisa Chen, who had voted with Michael, spoke up. "This is a serious mistake. Michael's vision for the company's future addresses challenges our current strategy ignores. We are choosing short-term stability over long-term relevance." "The decision has been made," Victor said firmly. As for your resignation, Michael, the board will need to discuss transition arrangements. Of course, Michael agreed pleasantly. Though you should know I've already informed major shareholders of my intention to launch a new venture focused on sustainable technology and meaningful social impact. Several have expressed interest in redirecting their investments. The calculated statement had its intended effect. Uncertainty flickered across several board members' faces. Victor's expression hardened. That would be an extremely hostile action. Not at all, Michael countered. Just healthy competition in the free market you all value so highly. He stood, gathering his materials. I wish you all the best with the company's future direction. I'll always value what we built together. As he left the boardroom for the last time, Michael felt none of the devastation he might have expected. Instead, a profound sense of lightness and possibility accompanied each step. The elevator carried him down from the executive floor to the lobby, symbolically transitioning him from heir to innovator, from caretaker to creator. Outside, spring sunshine warmed the city streets. On impulse, Michael dismissed his driver and walked the 15 blocks home, savoring the simple freedom of movement without schedule or expectation. Street vendors, small shops, and ordinary people going about their lives, a world he'd observed through car windows but rarely engaged with directly. When he arrived home, he found Emily and Eleanor in the art room they'd established working. On a collaborative painting, both looked up expectantly as he entered. "Well," Emily demanded, "did you crush the opposition with your corporate superpowers?" Michael laughed. "Not exactly. I resigned." Eleanor nodded as if she'd expected nothing less, while Emily's eyes widened. "You quit, just like that?" "Just like that," Michael confirmed. "And it feels—" He searched for the right word. "Right. Like putting down a heavy suitcase I've been carrying for years." "What now?" Emily asked, setting aside her paintbrush. "Now," Michael said, rolling up his shirt sleeves, "I build something new. Something that represents my values, not just my inheritance." He gestured to their painting. "May I join you? I haven't painted since I was about 12. As the afternoon unfolded in creative exploration, rather than corporate strategy, Michael found himself thinking of the many paths not taken over the years, interests abandoned, passions set aside, relationships sacrificed to the demands of legacy. Some were lost forever, but others might still be reclaimed. Later, as they shared a casual dinner in the kitchen rather than the formal dining room, another small rebellion against established patterns, Michael outlined his emerging vision for his new venture. "I'm thinking of calling it Phoenix Initiative," he explained. "Focused on technologies that solve real problems, clean energy, sustainable agriculture, accessible healthcare, and structured as a benefit corporation rather than purely profit-driven." "Will it make money?" Emily asked practically. "Eventually, yes, but that won't be the only measure of success." Through it all, Michael maintained a steady course, neither backing down nor escalating the conflict. Instead, he focused on articulating his vision for the company's future, one centered on innovation and positive impact rather than mere market domination. At home, another transformation was underway. The study, stripped of his father's influence, gradually accumulated new elements that reflected Michael's emerging sense of self. A small watercolor painting by Eleanor found a place of honor on one wall. A framed sketch by Emily, the portrait of Michael she had drawn that first week, hung opposite the desk. Most significantly, Michael moved his workspace from the formal office to a sun-filled corner of the garden room, where light streamed through windows overlooking the grounds. The symbolic shift from his father's shadowed domain to a space of growth and light wasn't lost on anyone in the household. On Wednesday afternoon, as Michael reviewed documents for the upcoming board showdown, he received an unexpected visitor. Bradford Wells, the foundation's largest donor and a longtime family associate, arrived unannounced. "Bradford?" Michael greeted him in the newly reimagined garden room. "I didn't realize we had an appointment." The older man took in the changed surroundings with raised eyebrows. "We don't. I thought it best to speak with you directly, given the situation." As they settled into comfortable chairs, Bradford got straight to the point. "Your board is in turmoil, Michael. Victor believes you've had some sort of breakdown. Others think you're being influenced by Outside forces. His gaze flicked meaningfully toward the hall, where Emily's voice could be heard faintly as she chatted with Eleanor. I'm being influenced by my own conscience, Michael replied evenly, something I've neglected for too long. Bradford nodded thoughtfully. I've known you since you were a boy, Michael. Your father was a brilliant businessman, but a complicated man. He cast a long shadow. One I've lived in my entire life, Michael agreed. Perhaps it's time to step into your own light, Bradford suggested, surprising Michael with his supportive tone. Your proposal for the arts program for foster youth, I've been giving it serious consideration. Have you? Indeed. After your young friend's passionate advocacy, I did some research. The statistics regarding outcomes for foster children are dismal. Arts education shows promising results for building resilience and self-efficacy. He leaned forward. I'm prepared to commit significant funding to pilot the program, regardless of the board's position on your other initiatives. Michael studied the older man with new appreciation. Why the change of heart? Bradford smiled wryly. Let's say your young friend's honesty was refreshing in a world of calculated diplomacy, and perhaps I recognize something in your recent choices that resonates with my own journey. After Bradford departed, Michael sought out Emily, finding her in what had become her favorite spot, the window seat in the library overlooking the garden. Guess who just pledged major support for your art program? Emily looked up from her book suspicious. Who? Bradford Wells. Apparently your passionate advocacy convinced him. You mean my public meltdown? Emily grimaced. Great. Sometimes, Michael observed, the truth needs to be spoken bluntly to be heard at all. Emily marked her place in her book. How's the corporate war going? Uncertain, Michael admitted, but I'm finding I care less about the outcome than I expected. Win or lose, I'm making decisions based on what I believe in, not what's expected of me. That feels like victory already. Emily studied him thoughtfully. You're different since that first night. Am I? You smile more. Real smiles, not those fake CEO ones that don't reach your eyes. She shrugged. You seem more, I don't know, alive. The observation struck Michael deeply. She was right. Something fundamental had shifted within him. The constant pressure in his chest, the sense of never quite measuring up to expectations, had eased. In its place was something quieter but more sustaining, a sense of purpose rooted in authenticity rather than obligation. Thank you for noticing, he said simply. Emily flushed, uncomfortable with the genuine moment. Yeah, well, don't get a big head about it. You're still a corporate robot most of the time. Michael laughed, a real laugh that indeed reached his eyes. Fair enough. That evening, as Michael worked late preparing for the following day's decisive board meeting, he found Eleanor sitting in the garden room gazing out at the moonlit grounds. Can't sleep? He asked, joining her. My mind is too full these days, she replied. The doctors say it's a good sign, neural pathways reactivating. I may have more lucid time than they predicted. She turned to him, her eyes clear in the soft light. Your father would have a stroke, Eleanor observed, though her tone suggested this wasn't necessarily a criticism. Probably, Michael agreed, but I'm not building this for him. That evening, Michael received an unexpected call from Lisa Chen. 3 other board members and I have been talking, she said without preamble. We're considering resigning to join your new venture, if you're open to it. The news was surprising but welcome. I'd be honored to have you all. Victor is in panic mode, Lisa continued. Several major shareholders are questioning the vote outcome, especially after your departure became public. The stock dropped 12% this afternoon. I'm not trying to damage the company, Michael clarified. That's still my family's legacy. I know, Lisa assured him. But change often requires disruption first. I think something important is happening here, Michael. Something beyond corporate maneuvering. After the call, Michael found himself drawn to the garden, where the old oak tree stood silhouetted against the night sky. The tree he'd climbed as a child, seeking escape from the weight of expectations even then. Now, decades later, he was finally claiming that freedom in earnest. Emily's voice interrupted his reflections. Your mom's looking for you. Something about old files you might want. Michael turned to find her hovering uncertainly at the garden's edge, her figure half illuminated by light from the house. "Join me for a minute?" he invited. She approached cautiously, still maintaining the emotional distance that was her instinctive protection. "So you're really doing this, starting over from scratch?" "Not quite from scratch," Michael corrected. "I have experience, connections, resources, and clarity I didn't have before." Emily scuffed the grass with her shoe. "What about me, in all this new stuff you're planning?" The question revealed a vulnerability she rarely displayed. Despite her tough exterior, she was still a teenager who had experienced too many disruptions, too many broken promises. "Nothing changes there," Michael assured her. "This is still your home for as long as you want it. The offer to support your education still stands. In fact," he hesitated, then continued, "I've been thinking about formalizing the arrangement, becoming your legal guardian if you're open to it." Emily's head snapped up, shock evident in her expression. "Like adopt me?" "Legal guardianship," Michael clarified. "Given your age, formal adoption doesn't make practical sense, but this would give you stability, support, medical coverage, educational opportunities." "Why would you do that?" Suspicion darkened her features. "Is this some kind of PR move for your new company? Generous executive saves street kid?" "No," Michael said firmly. "This has nothing to do with business or public relations. This is about family, the one we choose, not just the one we're born into." Emily turned away, but not before Michael glimpsed the sheen of tears she was fighting to control. "I'll think about it," she managed, her voice rough with emotion. "Take all the time you need," Michael replied gently. "The offer doesn't expire." As Emily retreated to the house, Michael remained in the garden, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. Not all transformations were instantaneous or dramatic. Some, perhaps the most meaningful ones, happened gradually, choice by choice, moment by moment. He had taken the first steps on a new path. Where exactly it would lead remained uncertain, but for the first time in decades, the uncertainty felt like possibility rather than risk. 3 weeks into his new venture, Michael found himself working from the garden room, surrounded by preliminary business plans and potential investor presentations. The Phoenix Initiative was taking shape rapidly, with Lisa Chen and the other defectors from Harrington Enterprises bringing valuable expertise and connections. The work energized rather than depleted him. Each decision felt aligned with his values rather than inherited expectations. The contrast with his previous role was stark and illuminating, like the difference between wearing someone else's perfectly tailored suit and finally choosing his own comfortable clothes. Eleanor entered with tea, her movements slower these days, but her mind remarkably present. The art therapy Emily had intuitively begun was showing measurable benefits, slowing the progression of her condition according to her neurologist. "Reminds me of the early days," she commented, setting down the tray, "when your father was just starting out, before success changed him." Michael looked up with interest. "What was he like then?" "Passionate. Idealistic even." Eleanor smiled. At the memory. He wanted to create technology that would improve lives, not just generate wealth. Somewhere along the way, the means became the end. "I wish I'd known that version of him," Michael said quietly. "You have more of him in you than you realize," Eleanor replied. "The best parts." She gestured to the plans spread before him. "This new path, it's what Richard might have chosen if he'd had your courage." The perspective was unexpected, but strangely healing, a reframing of his father's legacy that allowed Michael to honor the man's vision while forging his own. Later that afternoon, Michael received a call that would test his new resolve. Victor Harlow requested an urgent meeting at a neutral location, a private club downtown, where the city's business elite conducted their most sensitive negotiations. "I'm not interested in being talked back into the company," Michael clarified, before agreeing to the meeting. "This is about protecting what your father built," Victor replied cryptically. "I believe we both want that, despite our differences." The club's atmosphere of mahogany and leather, of privilege and power, felt oddly foreign now. A world Michael had inhabited his entire life, but suddenly viewed as an anthropologist might, Noting its customs and unspoken rules with fresh perspective, Victor was waiting in a private room, a tumbler of scotch already in hand. "Thank you for coming, Michael. Recent developments have forced a reconsideration of our position." Michael took a seat but declined a drink. "What developments?" "Meridian. Tech has made an aggressive move toward a hostile takeover of Harrington," Victor explained grimly. "They're leveraging our recent instability. Several key shareholders who were upset by your departure have agreed to tender their shares." The news was surprising but not entirely unexpected. Meridian had been circling for years, waiting for vulnerability. "How close are they to succeeding?" "Too close," Victor admitted. "We need to present a united front to survive this. The board is prepared to reconsider your proposals if you'll return and help us fight off this takeover." The offer was precisely what Michael would have wanted 3 weeks ago: validation, victory, vindication. Now it felt like being offered her key to a cage he'd finally escaped. "I appreciate the outreach," Michael said carefully, "but I've started down a different path." Victor leaned forward urgently. "This is your father's company, Michael. His life's work. Can you really stand by and watch it be dismantled by competitors?" The question struck at Michael's deepest sense of filial obligation. Could he? Should he abandon his newfound direction to save his father's legacy? "I need to consider all options," he finally said, "including some you may not have explored." As he left the club, Michael's phone buzzed with a text from Emily. "Emergency. At home, come back ASAP." His heart racing, Michael rushed back to find not a crisis, but a surprise. Emily had assembled a small gathering in the garden room. Eleanor was there, along with Lisa Chen, Bradford Wells, and the directors of 3 foster care organizations. A banner hung across one wall: Phoenix Arts Initiative. Emily stood nervously at the center. "Surprise," she said awkwardly, as Michael entered. "I might have borrowed your business plan format to create this." Spread across the large table were detailed proposals for the arts program Eleanor had first mentioned at the gala, now expanded into a comprehensive initiative targeting foster youth across the city with potential for national scaling. "Emily approached us with this concept," explained the director of the largest foster care network. "It's incredibly well conceived. Bradford has already committed seed funding, and we've identified potential locations for pilot programs." Michael looked at Emily in amazement. "You did all this?" She shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. "Your mom helped, and I figured if you could start over with something that matters to you, maybe I could too." She met his eyes with uncharacteristic vulnerability. "Also, about that guardianship thing. I'm in, if you still are." The simple statement hit Michael with unexpected force, a confirmation that the connection they'd built was genuine and mutual. In that moment, the question Victor had posed answered itself. Yes, he could step away from his father's legacy because he was building something more valuable, a legacy of his own based on authentic purpose and genuine human connection. "I have an idea," Michael said, looking around the gathered group. "What if Phoenix Arts became the first major initiative of Phoenix Enterprises? A corporate non-profit partnership from day one." The energy in the room shifted as possibilities expanded. For the next 2 hours, they brainstormed structures, synergies, and implementation pathways. Michael found himself energized in a way board meetings had never achieved: creation rather than maintenance, collaboration rather than competition. When the others had departed, Michael found himself alone with Emily and Eleanor in the garden room, now littered with planning documents and half-empty coffee cups. "I got a call today," he told them, explaining Victor's offer. "Harrington Enterprises is facing a hostile takeover. Are you going back?" Emily asked, her tone carefully neutral despite the obvious concern in her eyes. Michael shook his head. "No, but I think I can help without returning to my old role." "How?" Eleanor inquired. "By offering a third option." Michael's mind was already racing with possibilities. A partnership between Phoenix and Harrington that would block Meridian while allowing both companies to maintain independence. It would require Victor and the board to accept a new paradigm, but it might save the company while allowing me to continue this new path. Eleanor nodded approvingly. A diplomatic solution your father would never have considered. Which is precisely why it might work. Later that night, after both Eleanor and Emily had retired, Michael stood at the window of what had been his father's study and was now truly his own. The room that had once felt like a mausoleum now vibrated with possibility. On the desk lay two paths forward, his plans for Phoenix and his strategy for saving Harrington without sacrificing his new direction. For the first time in his adult life, Michael felt fully present in his own story rather than playing a role in someone else's. The sensation was both terrifying and exhilarating, like finally learning to fly after years of being told he could only walk. Tomorrow would bring negotiations, challenges, perhaps defeats alongside victories. But tonight, in the quiet of his transformed space, Michael knew with absolute certainty that he had crossed the final threshold. Whatever came next would be authentically his choice, his path, his life. 6 months later, Michael stood at the C podium in the renovated warehouse that now served as the Phoenix Arts Initiative's flagship center. Sunlight streamed through skylights, illuminating spaces where foster youth engaged with various art forms: painting, sculpture, digital media, music. On one wall hung a mural created by the first cohort of participants, depicting a phoenix, rising from ashes toward a bright future. Today marks not just the official opening of this center, Michael addressed the gathered community members, program participants, and media, but the beginning of a new approach to supporting youth in foster care. Art isn't just an activity here. It's a pathway to self-discovery, to healing, and to possibility. From the front row, Emily watched with a mixture of pride and embarrassment at being acknowledged. Beside her sat Eleanor, whose health had stabilized thanks to innovative therapies funded through the foundation Michael had established, alongside his business ventures. The past months had brought profound changes on multiple fronts. The partnership Michael had proposed between Phoenix Enterprises and Harrington Technologies, as the company was now known, had indeed blocked Meridian's takeover attempt while allowing both entities to evolve. Victor Harlow had eventually retired, replaced by Lisa Chen as CEO of Harrington, with Michael maintaining a board position but no operational role. Phoenix had grown faster than anyone predicted, attracting top talent drawn to its mission-driven approach. The innovative technologies they were developing in sustainable energy and healthcare were already generating significant interest from investors and industry partners alike. But it was the Phoenix Arts Initiative that had emerged as the most transformative element of Michael's new direction. The program had quickly demonstrated profound impacts, with participants showing improvements in emotional regulation, academic performance, and future orientation. After the ceremony, as attendees mingled throughout the center, Michael found Emily in the photography studio, adjusting equipment for the next day's classes. "Hiding from your adoring public?" he teased. Gently, she rolled her eyes. "Just making sure everything's ready for tomorrow. Some of us have actual work to do." Despite her sardonic tone, Emily's transformation over these months had been remarkable. The defensive wariness that had once defined her had gradually given way to cautious confidence. With Michael's guardianship providing stability and support, she had completed her GED and begun taking college courses in arts education and nonprofit management, while simultaneously helping develop the initiative's programming. "I meant what I said in my speech," Michael told her. "None of this would exist without you. You were the catalyst for everything." Emily flushed, still uncomfortable with direct praise. "I just called you on your bullshit. You did the hard part." "We both did," Michael corrected. "That's how change works, person to person, moment to moment." Bradford Wells approached, interrupting their conversation. "Remarkable achievement," he commented, gesturing around the center, "and the preliminary data on program outcomes is compelling enough that 3 other cities have requested implementation plans." "That's Emily's department," Michael replied, watching with satisfaction as she straightened her shoulders and engaged Bradford in a detailed discussion of expansion strategies. Eleanor joined them, moving slowly with her cane but with eyes bright and engaged. "It's like watching 2 different people," she murmured to Michael as Emily confidently outlined her vision to Bradford. "Both of you." "We've all changed," Michael acknowledged. For the better, I think. Eleanor nodded. Your father would be proud, you know. Not because you saved his company, though you did in your way, but because you found your own path. She squeezed his hand. I'm certainly proud. The simple statement, delivered without qualification, filled a space in Michael's heart that had been empty for longer than he could remember. All his life he had pursued approval through achievement, through maintaining what others had built. Now, having finally created something authentic, he found that approval mattered less than the knowledge that he was living in alignment with his values. Later that evening, the three of them, Michael, Emily, and Eleanor, sat in the garden of the Harrington home, sharing a casual dinner beneath string lights that transformed the formal space into something magical. I had a call from Victor. Today, Michael mentioned as they finished dessert. He's been traveling since his retirement, apparently discovering there's a world beyond corporate boardrooms. Better late than never, Emily commented. Indeed, he actually apologized for opposing my vision for the company, said he's been following our progress and is impressed with what we've accomplished. Eleanor smiled knowingly. Vindication is sweet, isn't it? It is, Michael admitted, though not as important as it once would have been. As the conversation drifted to other topics, Michael found himself reflecting on the journey of the past year. From that rainy night when he'd first encountered Emily, a chance meeting that had catalyzed profound transformation, to today's celebration of what they'd built together. The path had not been linear or easy. There had been board battles and legal challenges, moments of doubt and difficult conversations. The business press had alternately celebrated and criticized his decisions. Some relationships had ended, others had evolved. Through it all, Michael had maintained his commitment to authentic purpose rather than inherited expectation. Most significantly, the mansion that had once felt like a mausoleum had transformed into a home. Rooms previously preserved in pristine. Emptiness now showed signs of actual living. Eleanor's painting supplies in the sunroom, Emily's books and sketches scattered throughout, spaces reconfigured for comfort rather than impression. I have news, Emily announced suddenly, interrupting Michael's reflections. I got the scholarship, full ride to the Art Institute starting next fall. Emily, Eleanor exclaimed, that's wonderful. Michael felt a complex mixture of pride and wistfulness. Congratulations, your portfolio obviously impressed them. Yeah, well, Emily shrugged, though her suppressed smile revealed her genuine excitement. The recommendation letters probably helped. Yours and Bradford's. They simply told the truth, Michael replied. Your talent and determination did the rest. As the evening wrapped around them like a gentle embrace, Michael realized that the empty ache that had accompanied him for so many years had finally been filled, not with achievement or acquisition, but with connection and purpose. The mansion that had once represented obligation now sheltered a chosen family. The name that had once been a burden to uphold now stood for values he genuinely believed in. He had lost his father's company in a sense, but found something far more valuable, his own authentic life and the courage to live it fully. 1 year to the day after Michael had resigned from Harrington Enterprises, he stood alone on the roof terrace of the Phoenix headquarters, a renovated industrial building whose transformation mirrored his own journey. The evening sky painted the city in shades of gold and purple, a natural masterpiece more valuable than any corporate acquisition. The past year had unfolded in ways he could never have predicted. Phoenix Enterprises had established itself as an innovation leader in sustainable technologies. The Harrington-Phoenix partnership had stabilized both companies while allowing each to pursue its distinct vision. Most importantly, the Phoenix Arts Initiative had expanded to 5 locations across 3 states, with documented success in improving outcomes for hundreds of foster youth. Emily had thrived, completing her first semester at the Art Institute with honors, while continuing to help shape the initiative's programming. Eleanor's condition had stabilized, though her memory still faltered. Her engagement with art and her role as informal mentor to initiative participants gave her days meaning and purpose. Michael himself had found an unexpected balance, no longer defined solely by business achievement, but not removed from it either. His role now combined strategic vision with personal values, Competition with collaboration, achievement with meaning. The roof door opened behind him, and Emily emerged with 2 cups of coffee. "Figured I'd find you up here being all dramatic and contemplative," she teased, handing him a cup. Michael smiled, accepting both the coffee and the gentle mockery. "Just appreciating the view." "Uh-huh. Nothing to do with it being exactly 1 year since you threw your corporate tantrum and walked out on the board." "I prefer to think of it as a principled stand," Michael corrected mildly. Emily joined him at the railing, looking out over the city. At 18, she carried herself with a confidence that her younger self would have marveled at. Her art was gaining recognition. Her contributions to the initiative's development were substantive and valued. "I've been thinking," she said after a comfortable silence, "about that night, when you found me in the rain." "What about it? You could have just walked past. Most people would have." She hesitated, uncharacteristically vulnerable. "I never really understood why you didn't." Michael considered the question seriously. "I think perhaps I recognize something in you, a reflection of my own trapped potential. Or maybe I just needed to do something real, something human after years of going through prescribed motions." "Lucky coincidence for both of us," Emily observed. "I don't believe it was coincidence," Michael replied. "More like alignment, the right moment for both of us to change direction." Emily nodded thoughtfully. "Like when you're making art, and suddenly the composition clicks into place, and you realize the whole time you were working towards something you couldn't quite see until it appeared." "Exactly like that," Michael agreed, struck by the aptness of her metaphor. From the street below came the sounds of the city, traffic and voices, music and movement, the cacophony of lives intersecting in countless ways. Some of those intersections were momentary. Others would prove transformative in ways that might not be recognized for years. "Eleanor wants to create a scholarship," Emily mentioned, "specifically for fostered youth interested in art therapy as a career. She's been talking to Bradford about funding models." Michael smiled at this evidence of his mother's continued engagement with meaningful work, despite her condition. "Sounds like her, always thinking of the bigger picture." "Must run in the family," Emily replied. Then, with characteristic directness, "Are you happy with all this?" She gestured toward the Phoenix building, the initiative centers visible. In the distance, the new life he had created. The question echoed their conversation from a year earlier, when she had asked if he was happy with his inherited empire. This time, Michael's answer came without hesitation. "Yes," he said simply. "Not because everything is perfect, it isn't. We still face challenges, resistance, setbacks, but the work itself has meaning. The connections are genuine, the path is authentically mine." He turned to face her fully. "And you? Are you happy?" Emily considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I'm still figuring out what that means exactly, but..." She glanced around at the city, at the headquarters, at the life that had seemed impossible a year ago. "I'm not afraid of the future anymore. That's something. That's everything," Michael corrected gently. As twilight deepened into evening, they remained side by side, 2 people whose chance encounter had catalyzed profound transformation for both. Michael thought about the ongoing nature of change, how it rarely arrived in dramatic moments of complete reinvention, but rather through small choices accumulating over time. How true growth wasn't about erasing the past, but integrating it into a more authentic present. His father's legacy remained part of him, not as a burden to maintain, but as one thread in a tapestry he was actively weaving. The company still bore the Harrington name, but now it represented values Michael genuinely believed in. The wealth he had inherited now served purposes that aligned with his deepest convictions. Most importantly, the mansion that had once been a monument to achievement had become a home for a chosen family. Eleanor with her art and wisdom, Emily with her talent and honesty, and Michael himself, no longer performing a role, but finally, authentically living. "We should head back down," Emily said eventually. "The team wanted to surprise you with a cake or something equally corporate for your Independence Day." Michael laughed. "We shouldn't keep them waiting then." As they turned to leave, the setting sun cast their shadows long across the rooftop. not separate outlines but interconnected shapes, distinct yet part of the same tableau. In that simple image lay the essence of what Michael had discovered through his journey, that true transformation is rarely a solo endeavor, but rather the product of meaningful connection with others who help us see ourselves more clearly. Emily paused at the door, looking back at him with unexpected earnestness. "Thank you for everything." "Thank you," Michael replied with equal sincerity, "for helping me find my way." Together they descended from the rooftop to rejoin their community, not an ending but another step in an ongoing journey of authentic purpose and genuine connection.